Good day, everybody. Dave Walker here with the B to SMB Institute, and we are here with Julian Posada of Liftup Enterprises. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you, Dave. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Yours is an unusual session in the context of all of the different sessions that we're doing over these 2 days at the Best to SMB conference, but one that I really hope people pay attention to. But as background, why don't you give a little 411 on you? I've known you since when? 2002, probably? We're probably
Yes.
closing in on 20 years of knowing each other,
Yeah.
but also of you and of Liftup.
No, I appreciate that. And again, just happy to be here. So yeah, Dave, you and I have known each other. I think I consider myself a serial entrepreneur with, that kind of knows what he's doing, but kind of doesn't, just kind of pushes through. So eclectic background from launching newspapers when you and I met. I was fortunate to run a sports team, worked at banking, did some private equity work, and worked for a couple of large nonprofits and big media companies. And Liftup, really is a culmination of all my experiences coming together and really melding this, do well and do good. And it really came out of a frustration of how can we actually start solving problems that I started seeing around the United States. And it's a for-profit social enterprise that works at stabilizing and accelerating the stability of the working poor or low-wage workers. And so we built a company that provides direct service, right? So in cleaning, landscaping, painting, and graphics design and graphic wrapping from a business perspective, but at the same time has a nonprofit component of it that provides wraparound services for our low-wage workers to help them along their path for them to be stable in however they want to be able to do it, and then ultimately mobility so that they can move into better jobs or be more stable with their family or however they want to define that.
So fascinating, and I described it to a couple of people as kind of a unicorn of this straddle between being, what traditionally is the mission and remit of a not-for-profit agency and the remit and mission of a for-profit business that is in a targeted category whose workers are primarily low-wage workers. And you just don't see those two things really coming together in one business, do you? Or one entity?
I don't. And I think what it has been for a long time has been, well, I don't need to worry about what's going on after they go to work. I just need to make sure that when they're at work, they're good. But what the business community also struggles with is turnover, right? And poor quality work and errors and mistakes. And when you look at low wage workers, if you want productivity to go up and if you want turnover to go down, it's very hard not to figure out how to deal with the whole human being, because poverty affects humans very, very up and down their social, emotional, and other places. So yeah, trying to put all of it under one roof and really drive strategy, practical stuff to run a business. These are difficult businesses. These are service-based businesses that are labor intensive, but we've been able to come up with a methodology and ways of supporting our workers that we're starting to see the fruits of that labor to have, consistently below industry average turnover. And we're seeing people get a little bit more trust in us to start actually thinking about what to do next. How do you get a landscaper to go up a ladder to do something much bigger, right? And that takes time.
What were some of back in 2018 when you founded this, what were some of the specific challenges on the low wage worker side that you put in your top to-do list that were the challenges that you wanted to address with Liftup?
There's many, but I appreciate that, Dave. I think that it's very well written, very well documented. And so when you sit with a lot of the biggest philanthropy, I spent a lot of time working across philanthropy and non-philanthropy. So when you go to the biggest foundations, they'll say housing is huge. They'll say, job creation is big. But when you dig down deeper, I honed in on three very specific ones. One was anything to do with liquidity, right? We all know the bad side, like people take out loans they can't do, people go to payday loans, people don't have money to save for a rainy day. God
Mhm.
forbid they say they don't know how to save for a 529, never been given that, or a 401k. That was one. The second one, and we're seeing this even increase more now than ever, is mental health. So there's physical health, right? Which is, hey, can you go to a doctor? But then the emotional carnage that's happening around post-COVID, it was happening before, but now we're seeing it materialize. It was the second one. And then the third one that we're starting to stick our foot into is food insecurity. And those three things will affect your ability to perform as a human, let alone regardless of the task, right? I think poverty really hits those hard. So we started just really poking the bear on how do you actually, as a business, save or work on issues of liquidity? What do you do? How do you do that? And what's your responsibility as a small business, and what's the responsibility of the social sector, right? And so we started looking at what is the social sector service doing? What are those social services? So plenty of nonprofits doing amazing work doing financial literacy, and the banking community trying to say, banks now are saying, oh, look, I'll give you, different terms, this and that. But what is the role of that corporation? So as I started talking to a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, what I realized is there wasn't a playbook, or, well, that doesn't work in my business. And so that really started me to say, if we can figure out a way in low tech, high labor businesses with low barriers to entry, with decent margins, but they're really tough to get to, who's one of the biggest cost drivers is humans. You can solve the human piece. You're going to be able to help an ecosystem, small business ecosystem, get better. And you're also going to be able to educate and or work with bigger institutions that we're starting to do now, that will start to look differently at how best can they engage with, we're a small minority supplier, right? So as an MBE, we're really trying to, okay, how do you grow as a small business? And these things take time, but it's easier if we can give people a playbook. So those were the three biggest ones. Others have come up. So issues of transportation are big, and I can't solve everybody's problem. But if we really focus on liquidity, we feel we can start to make a dent to give people back time, because they're still going to be stressed about their paychecks. That's not a problem. I mean, that's always going to be a problem, but you can start to give them time to think about, well, what can I do to get out of this? And that's very difficult when you're thinking paycheck to paycheck, when you're thinking I have 2 jobs, if not 3 jobs, when I'm thinking that, what am I going to do to put food on the table next? It's just very difficult.
And I want to circle back on a question, but I want to ask you at this juncture, it really is is what you're really trying to do is design a replicable model so that it really is, hey, to your words, I've got a playbook, but it's not just as the playbook of what to do, it's the playbook of how to do it.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, I've been able to run many sexy companies, and this is not for the faint-hearted. I mean, for anybody who is in this listening and doing this type of work, this isn't hard. This isn't easy. But it is 2 things. One is, when you look at social enterprise across the country, scalability is a big issue. And so the philanthropic world has millions and billions of dollars on the sideline, and they need projects that can scale. And that's been very difficult for that ecosystem. Foundations as well need, hey, listen, I don't want to just put good money over bad money and just keep funding a black hole. So yes, scalability is important. And then what I just said about liquidity, that's agnostic to cleaning and landscaping and painting. Companies, telehealth, just go, anybody who's making under $20 an hour in a big DMA like Chicago, you're functionally poor. I don't care what you say. So you can figure out ways, and you're a nail salon, pay everybody once a week, and we have these other things that we are starting to measure. Can you start to give people back a sense of wanting or being able to have the cognitive ability to do something different? And that model is something that you can do in Tupelo, Mississippi, or you can do in Arizona. It's not wed to Chicago. And I'm not here to become a $900 million cleaning company. What I want to be able to prove to small businesses is that you can be $2 to $3 to $4 million or even smaller. These are not dependent on how much money you make.
Right.
tactical. It's a way to run the company. So our organizing principle is really based on the word dignity. So am I making a dignified decision for my employee, right? When do we schedule vacations? How do we look at training, OSHA training? Okay, well, when do you do that? We know it's important. Do you pay for it? Do you not? What's the dignified approach to that? Because what we want is our employees to feel like they're valuable, right? How do you do a spot bonus? Is it good? Is it bad? When do you do it? What are you doing it around? And so we've slowed down that mechanism to think about it. We just start to, I mean, we just think about the employee all day long. And what happens is, as it's not everyone is in your ecosystem knows it, you have a happy employee, and guess what? Usually they try to do better work. But we're also, the second piece of that is we're also understanding that if you are functionally poor, the probability that 70-80% of your entire ecosystem of that employee is also functionally poor. So we're also thinking outside of just my employee. So, we like, I got a guy, or, friends and family is important. So we not only figure out a way to help our employees, but everything that we're doing for our employees, we also say, please share with your family. So if we do a financial wellness, we get a nonprofit do financial wellness, we encourage, hey, you got to bring your family to that. Who else can benefit from this? If we do an immigration workshop with another nonprofit, anybody in your ecosystem could benefit from this. And what we find is we're giving back self-respect to a profession pre-COVID and still now during COVID that didn't, was in the, lost people.
Right. Didn't feel respected at all.
Yeah.
So what are the metrics of success, for lack of a better phrase? What are the things that you use, and what are the things that thus far you've measured and said, hey, that feels pretty good?
What's fun about this is the universal language for a lot of people is turnover, right? So we can measure, hey, what are the industry averages in turnover? Are we doing better or worse than industry average? Okay, so that's an easy one. What we do know is when you look at nonprofits that provide these wraparound services, they also have their own metrics for, hey, if you spent time with a financial coach, did they or did they not put together a plan to better their credit? Did they or did they not put together a plan to purchase their first home? So we work closely with a nonprofit and say, listen, how are you measuring it? Right? So we measure how many wraparound services do our employees use, right? We measure turnover, right? We also measure, how often or how willing are they to think of different things to do in their career. So if we have a cleaner who just cleans, just basic cleaning, we try to put opportunities for them to, well, do you want to learn how to do strip and wax? Do you want to learn how to do other things, right? And we know that if you can do that, encourage them, and that's difficult because it's trust issues, scheduling issues, they got to feel comfortable with you. We have a lot of language issues. We measure that. We measure that disposition to, are you willing to take a pathway? Some are not. Some don't want to be managers. Some just are like, hey, listen, I want to stay in my lane. So those three really drive. And obviously, if we're profitable, like this doesn't work if you're not break even and you're not making money, right? So my investors are like, hey, wait a second, Julian, you got to show me my returns. But at the same time, these impact numbers are really important. And then wage increase, right? We've set a target that, we want to make sure people, more than 50% of our employees have raises, right? And a chunk of those have higher wages than inflation. And then lastly, when we're profitable, we're working on this. It's not new. Someone told me the 53rd week, right? So the goal is every employee, me included, as a CEO, down to everybody. We are working towards everyone getting the 53rd week, right? The bonus if all of us get it. And there's other things that we created. My employees have profits interest, so they'll own the company, right? They'll have access to 401ks, 529s, right? This isn't a cleaning business. It's, am I doing it? Are we there yet on everything? No, but what we're starting to see is people opening up more that, wow, this is a different type of employer. And so we're winning customers, right? Because without good service and without competitive pricing, it doesn't mean anything, right? A lot of business. But then we're also helping hold nonprofits accountable to the quality of the service being deployed to the employees. And that edge effect between these two ecosystems coming together is what we're starting to see innovation, right? Mental health is parent. How do you parent if you have 3 jobs? during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking families to cram into a 2-hour, 3-hour section, cook, clean, feed your kids, make sure they're good human citizens, and then go back to your second shift.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you compress? And so
Right.
there are nonprofits around the country that are trying to innovate in that space.
Mm-hmm.
We're becoming a test bed for that, you know?
Yeah, got it. So what made you decide to go the route of a for-profit model versus taking the not-for-profit route?
I think it was very simple. One or three reasons. One was you have to be able to put the best talent towards the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And my alternative was to go run a big company for a private equity fund, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think one was, if we can demonstrate that you can have a living, make a living, do well,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna be able to recruit better talent, and we're seeing it. Best business schools in the country are like, oh my God, Julian's scaling a social enterprise. I have purpose, right? So there was not enough examples. So I'm like, let me just go for it. Number two, capital. Foundations are still very rigid in how they can fund. They love our idea, but like, wait a second. So having the 501c3, I would tell you our biggest customer wouldn't take us seriously. You can't go to Comcast and say, look, I'm a cleaning company. They're like, wait a second. No. I want someone to be held accountable. So there is a stigma still that nonprofits don't do good work, which is wrong. But I wanted to prove that you can bring in capital to a for-profit that's still good, that our underlying mission is good. And then lastly, the ability to scale and the ability to, most nonprofits that's not their DNA. We set up from the beginning that this thing is going to have a holding company. We took the playbooks out of the best private equity holding companies and we built that. We got the best legal talent, best funding, and investors who said, wait, Julian, if this goes well, we can apply it. So the agriculture space is very interested in what we're doing. The healthcare space is very interesting. Why? Because if you have someone who's doing telehealth, right, from home, they're still making $20, $21 an hour, right? How do I make sure they're doing a good job if they have 2 jobs, 3 jobs? So our methodology is applicable. We've talked to hospitals, to meat packing plants. So there is a lot of opportunity to keep growing. And for small businesses in municipalities, that's the last piece. As you see city government, like, wait a second, they've done it, measuring it. How does that affect the way we look at small businesses? How does what he's doing help other small businesses? Because I think the impact that a company that has 5 employees can be profound. Just paying your employees once a week.
Absolutely. And
I
think that again, the model, the prototype that you're building can create such a terrific roadmap for others who are interested in the social enterprise space to say, okay, here's the model. I mean, I'll speak personally. When I'm still invited to lecture in business schools, and invariably a variation on the question of, why aren't you more involved in social causes? And I struggle with it and usually say back, because I don't believe that most of the organizations serving social needs have a business-like mindset. They don't really think in terms of resources converted into success. And that's, my cold-hearted capitalist kind of mentality of just saying, how do we do that? And that's, I think, when you first told me about this, that's what I appreciated so much. And I said, my God, this is something that that we can address really the larger community and say, no, this is really something that's very purpose driven and really for the benefit of community. But it's done with genuine capitalist metrics that are very much part of, what we are all challenged to do in our own P&Ls at any given day. So let me ask you this: in the relationship that obviously you have with not-for-profit organizations, because they sound like I'm disparaging not-for-profits, and I'm really not. But in that relationship that you have, do they feel at all threatened by what you are doing? Do they really understand and embrace that this new model could actually help them activate their services in so much more successful a way?
It's mixed, right? There is a chunk that absolutely, and there's another chunk that is really looking at it the way you looked at it, right? What we have been able to do is basically, hey, this is the way I would look at a, service, scope of work. If you're providing a service, like if I provide a pest control service and you still see the pest around, then that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
If you provide
Right.
a financial wellness or you do this and the problem still persists, why would I do it? So some are taking it as an opportunity to learn. I think others are looking at this as saying, the nonprofit ecosystem right now is under duress. COVID and all these other things, more needs for funding, but the funding community is also demanding much more rigor on metrics and outcomes. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you look at what we do, we're doing both, right? Like I have outcomes. Am I profitable? Am I not? What's my ROI, right? But I'm also, like I told you, you asked me what are the metrics. And so you're right, there are a couple nonprofits like, wait a second, this Liftup stuff could unlock for me more funding. Because as they grow, if we provide that funding well, we can go back to the nonprofit or the funders and say, look, we're being measured, we're being used by a for-profit, it has scalability, I need more capacity, we want to grow with them, because it is about the life cycle. And so it's mixed, and the same in the foundation world, because we're challenging, why wouldn't you give us money if we're actually keeping people in jobs, strengthening families, figuring out ways to keep them out of debt, and maybe some will one day want to buy a home. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to be funding? Right. And then we're also trying to give people upside of like, hey, listen, you get profit sharing, and like, it's not a co-op, because I really want to make it profit driven, but it's a mixed bag. I think we don't have the scale yet to influence the nonprofit ecosystem, but I do think that the way we measure and the way we hold them accountable is eye-opening. Some are threatened. The good ones are like, this is awesome, because we don't have an opportunity to test like this, and we're safe, right? Like, so it's interesting.
So are you ready to, can you talk yet about your relationship with Comcast?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think, it's interesting because Comcast has been a fantastic partner from the beginning, right? And it took them a while, right? Because it's like, wait a second, you're the size of a pimple. Like, I'm a giant, and we're in a big market like Chicago. Like, please, Julian, don't waste my time. But the foundation side and that staff really are trying to do good work, right? With their Comcast Essentials. Listen, we want to get the internet into places that they're not there. I'm like, well, I have humans that could probably use that bandwidth, right? So there's a connectivity within my employees and Comcast on the civic side. But then on the business side, you have what I found very nice about Comcast has been that at first it was like, Julian, this is hard work. And I get it. Carving out a small piece of a janitorial contract or landscaping contract when you have massive big contractors is difficult, right? I give them the credit to have the will. They took a risk to say, okay, Julian, we're going to give you a location, you're under scrutiny, don't screw it up. We didn't. And now what's been interesting is that now the door's open where now, like, hey, Julian, we really have talent issues. Like, where can we go recruit? We have warehouse people. We did this and that. Like, okay, well, I have these informal and formal networks. And if one of my solutions ultimately is to create pathways, right? So could we get people that are working with us that have 2 jobs, and is maybe that second job with Comcast at a warehouse? Right. So it's starting to evolve. And then as they look at workforce development and we look at workforce development, how can they test? You said something that I think resonates with a lot of our big for-profit customers is we're running it like a business. And we have the discipline of the business, and therefore we're getting more at bats, right? We're getting more chances to do it. So Comcast or ComEd, they're finding that they can incubate, I think, and innovate, right? I think shifting to ComEd more than Comcast a little bit, but ComEd is, I feel that they're saying, hey, listen, we can innovate. We can use these guys as a way of learning about how to be more inclusive and how do we work with small businesses. We're this regulated industry, and there's all these small businesses that we want to support. can with Liftup and our service businesses, is that a place where we can create a playbook to how to work with more small businesses? They're already doing it. So ComEd is already doing it, but
Mhm.
are there more innovative ways, right? Are there more ways
Mhm.
where we're spending all this money on workforce development? Could you incubate those jobs while you're at Do Right and other companies? I think we're just the first because
Mhm.
we're providing a service that they need,
Mhm.
right? We're bidding on it fairly, right? So they
Mhm.
have more regulations than most. And if we win that business, what are all the other things? Because that's what I feel that both Comcast and ComEd and other big companies want to get to. They want to get to that, hey, we're getting a lot of pressure to work with small business owners, to work with MBEs, to be more inclusive, to diversify our supply chain. But I can see the pressure they have. These are super
Mhm.
small businesses. How do they compete? It's a lot of effort for procurement people to say, oh, let me carve out, oh my God, and how many of these and how do I work with them? So the fact that we check a couple boxes, we're inclusive, we're working with the individual, I'm okay if someone works with us in 2 to 3 years, finds a pathway to go somewhere else, I'm okay with it. Like there's good turnover.
Mhm.
And that's like, it's not about keeping everybody. If I
Mhm.
have someone who's fantastic and Comcast use, because we've developed their personal skills, we got them out of debt, and they feel the confidence to go be a manager, I'm sure Comcast will pay them a lot more than I can. It would hurt, but
Mhm.
that's the model, right?
Right.
That is the model, right? Is
Right.
like, hey, how do you create pathways for people to get out of poverty?
Right.
I'm always going to have there's always going to be people who are low wage workers.
Right. So let me put you on the spot a bit. You talked about Comcast and ComEd.
Yeah.
We're the audience here is made up of leaders from very large brands who serve small businesses of all sizes across the country. And I would venture that when at the start of the pandemic and really the journey of the last 18 months, many of them have been woke, and I hate using that word, but that's the best word for it, really. They've been woke to the notion that their relationship to minority communities, urban communities, underdeveloped, underserved communities of small businesses has been, in many cases, lacking, and in many cases, greatly lacking. And I think that's being generous. And how would you describe or suggest that those listening to this say, boy, that's really intriguing what Julian is doing. I wonder how I could work with him on what he is doing. And I wonder how my small business customer base could work with him. What would you suggest?
Um, it's actually very common. I mean, I would tell you, I think first it takes, I mean, I know it's super simple, but like it takes the will to make the phone call, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that it takes executives to show a little bit of vulnerability. Like I'm not going to kill anybody, and there's other social enterprises that are doing it as well. And I think what it takes is, and I go back to this very profound word for me, is it takes a will. It takes the will to say, listen, they're small and they're clunky and they're trying to do this, but ultimately underneath, what I have found has been the big businesses are going to get 10 times more out of it than I am.
Right.
Right. And so what we have found was I've had a couple CEOs who said, Julian, I just need you to come in and talk to my head of accounting,
Mm-hmm.
HR,
Mm-hmm.
and procurement. And I just want you to talk about what you see that is happening within the construct of the working poor. What are those issues? And then I need you to leave. Because then I
Mm-hmm.
want to come back to them and say, listen, isn't that an amazing conversation? Do we pay our people once a week? And I'll give you one example. We had a company who I met the CEO and they said, before you go get a cup of coffee with me, I want you to bring how many job codes do you have of humans in your company that make $20 or under? This is a big company.
Mm-hmm.
You had 17 job codes. So 17 different workers in this big couple hundred million, maybe $1 billion business, 17 job codes. And when I said to him, how many humans are that? He's like, oh, it's about 200 people. I'm like, okay, those 200 people are all working in poverty.
Right.
So first there was a big pause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 17 out of maybe 150 job codes. I go, so all of those are working poor. What's the turnover on just those 17 job codes?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, Julian, came back and they're all, guess what? High.
Mm-hmm.
They can't escape poverty. right?
Right.
And so I said, do you pay those once a week, or do all of those get paid twice a week? Silence. Just simply go ask your HR person, what would it take for us to pay anybody who makes in these job codes get paycheck once a week? All these don't. That's a profound impact.
Right.
City government officials, I'm like, you know what? You want to do your MBE rating scoring? Give any company, I don't care if they're minority owned business or not, if they pay their employees, low wage workers, once a week, you should give them credit.
Yeah.
Because that is fundamentally changing the way we look at payday loans. And it's been proven. Like the math is out there that says, if you reduce the shock of waiting, I think McDonald's did some pioneering work a long time ago that errors, missed orders, and all this stuff happen in day 12, 13, and 14 of their biweekly paychecks. You just again, put yourself in their shoes. Like, who do I pay first? I'm living paycheck to paycheck. So just pay once a week. I mean, we're doing a whole bunch of other things like, spot bonuses based on smiling, right? Because we know a happy employee. I mean, in our business that works. There's plenty of other things, and so we're working on that. How do you give someone money for referral a new employee? There's a methodology. What do you put in the subject line? We can go deep because there is a psychology of how you communicate when someone starts to tunnel when you come forward. The same as, people cramming for a test. You start to just have narrow focus because your brain is telling you got to get that one thing done. Well, unlike an exam that once the exam's over, you have time to rest. Poverty doesn't take a vacation. It's just going to keep at you. And it's difficult. So you have to find systemic ways of working on that transportation. And it's almost not ending. I mean, how do you work on family dynamics? So, but I guess I'm spending the time as the CEO. That's what I spend my time on. With the long vision that will become a successful company with good profit margins, low turnover, and hopefully other people can say, oh, I can implement that. I'm okay with that because it's about execution. I think the thing that you and I have had a long history. When I ran newsletters, that was all about execution.
Right.
So I execute flawlessly. Well, not flawlessly, but I work hard at execution.
Right. Your place in the agenda, basically, of our 2-day conference is right before the afternoon where we have a number of executives from our large brand members in one-on-one fireside chats with their counterparts in not-for-profit advocacy organizations. And the whole point of the conversation is basically, okay, look, not that it's a bad thing that the substance of our relationship has been the passing of a check, a big check, usually in the form of a grant or funding of some specific initiative that the brand is supportive of in the advocacy organization. Couldn't there be so much more? Couldn't there be really a much richer dialogue, a more strategic dialogue that really talks about essentially the same endpoint, the same customer, the same person or population? So when we're all kind of standing around, and by this I mean the advocacy organizations and the brands standing around the common pool of underdeveloped, underserved communities, and we're thinking that the only way that we have, or the only model we have of effectively cooperatively helping those is for one side to reach over and hand a big check versus thinking through so much richer opportunities. And that's what the point of these, I think, half a dozen fireside chats are, is can we have the conversation at a more strategic level? What does that look like? And I think you're a really interesting bridge into that conversation, those conversations that are going on, because you're obviously down in the trenches of the underserved and the underdeveloped population and communities, the low wage workers, and where they live and who they work for and what they do with their money, what little money they have, and really addressing that, which I think would and should be of great interest to all of our brands that are frankly contemplating how they better serve, but trying to do it in a richer, in a bigger way. Where do you see Liftup in 5 years? Where do you hope to be?
Um, I think in 5 years we'll be a regional player. Like we'll start to
Hmm.
look at smaller markets outside of Chicago. I mean, this is a big political and very difficult market. I mean,
Hmm.
Chicago, so I
No
think
doubt.
we'll do better in as we look at other markets. I also think that we'll probably get into one or two other verticals, whether that be in agriculture space or in the healthcare space. And I think that we'll have attracted a lot of capital because the social investor,
Hmm.
who's just made a lot of money in the last 20 years, especially in the last five, and doesn't know where to deploy it. I think they're going to start to demand that, and businesses we're seeing it as well, right?
Hmm.
That holistic supply chain is really has purpose more built into it. Like I think that COVID has really exposed the haves and have-nots, and I think I'm very encouraged, by the way, of both small business owners saying, I have a role to play in this, right?
Hmm.
It's very refreshing, that you know businesses that have five or less employees. I mean, we've gone from 0 to 70 employees in 2 years, right? But I see the small business owner saying, "Well, can I do that?" But I think in 5 years that there's going to be places where Liftup is incubating other small businesses because of the
Hmm.
methodology, the HR,
Hmm.
the way I look at finance, like the way I look at
Hmm.
accounts payable, accounts receivable, like accounting stuff, right? And then um, and so I think that we'll be in multiple markets, we'll be a profitable business. I'll have employees that are hopefully getting dividends from they're getting the 53rd week, and we're at 200, 250, maybe 300 employees.
Hmm.
But most importantly, that we're giving hope and very practical advice. And I'll be back on this conference saying, here's what our data says. If you
Hmm.
want to help someone, do this first, then this, then this. And
Hmm.
we can look at a group of humans and say, I can give you predictive analytics that first fix their paycheck, then give them a Dunkin' Donuts card that's tied to this, and then do it on this day and say this subject line and this, and this, and a way of communicating with this population. Because sadly, in Chicago, for your audience, there's 1.3 million people pre-COVID were functionally poor. 1.3 million people. That number is bigger. And the tension, and again, I go back to mental health. We don't know what those outcomes are. So as employers are looking to keep their employees, these tactics and strategies, I hope, right, don't just help me, but they'll help the big businesses to think about how are we working with small. They'll help the nonprofit community. And we're trying to, and the last thing I'd say is that we're very coachable. Like I think in 5 years we'll start to take on different things and innovation in a unique way with technology. So that's the
Hmm.
last thing I'll say is like, we're pushing. How do you create? We're tinkering right now with a transportation's an issue. So could you create a hybrid between an Uber and Zipcar and Hertz? Because I
Hmm.
have employees that don't have a car and
Hmm.
might want to go to church or go to the supermarket. So by
Hmm.
being an employee, could you rent to own a car? And I'm not talking like a fancy car. I'm just saying like, how about a Toyota or
Yeah,
something
just
you can
four
plug and
wheels
play?
with an engine. Right. I get it. I get it. Yeah.
So, but what we find is our employees want that. Then that's the last thing I'd say is that, I think in 5 years that we'll have employees telling us, I actually
Hmm.
before 5 years, in a
Hmm.
year from now, I'm sure that once you unlock that trust from the employee and you
Hmm.
genuinely listen to what they want and their issues, I think more things are going to come up. I think we're going to find that employees are going to want things that most big employers don't know about, right? Or,
Hmm.
and how do you balance your P&L while at the same time, helping someone along their path.
Hmm.
So that those are big picture stuff.
This has been absolutely fascinating. I knew it would be. I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you're doing and what you shared today. And I think that we were talking before this session a little bit about. Um, I'll confess, it's hard to wrap your mind around what you're doing exactly, and maybe not so much that as wrap your mind around how can I help specifically, what can I do, how does this fit in the context of strategy and plan and playbook for any of the large organizations that are within our audience. But I do think that we all, I'll say again, we've all gotten a lot smarter about the challenges of the underserved communities that are within our business to small business ecosystem. And we all kind of share a passion for solving that problem. But I also think we've all recognized that you just can't throw money at this. You have to intelligently construct a response that doesn't perpetuate the problem, because it's just always being washed away by money. And that's what I so much appreciate about what you're doing. So let's talk about how I want you to come back. I want you to keep us updated, and I want you to, maybe next time talk a little bit more of kind of the connection points that the Squares of the world and the Verizons of the world and the Trinets of the world and the Honeybooks of the world, all of whom are sensitive to the low wage worker and their small business customers who employ low wage workers, that are big parts of their constituencies, or their customer bases. Figuring out exactly how they can help you is I think that's my mission, at least for the short term.
I appreciate that mission and vision, and I welcome any of the audience or whatever to reach out. And it's a process. Like, again, I'm just as frustrated as a lot of people about seeing injustice and what we need to do. So if I can be any part of trying to move that along, then that would be, I'm doing my job.
Thanks, Julian. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.